Welcome to L'Arte dell'Arme, the Bolognese podcast where we discuss the intricacies of the Bolognese tradition with the practitioners, translators, authors, and teachers working to bring the art back to life. This episode is part 2 of my interview with Eric Weiss, where we get into swordsmanship. I do want to talk to you about swords because that's why we're
Yeah,
friends,
that's why we're all here. Yeah.
right? So, of the four core authors, who's your favorite and why?
Hmm. That's always such a difficult question.
Yeah, nobody
Obviously,
likes
as we all
answering that question. Everybody's been hating on me for that one, but
know, it's an important one, though. It's an important one, though. It very much is gonna. It's gonna. You very much see like where the leaning is. But yeah, each book is written for a purpose. And I suppose my current one that I lean toward is Mazzolino. And that's just because I like the way he talks. Um, right, I come from a stage combat background. I have no uh, illusions about that, and one of the things that I think even got me to that third place was just a little bit of performance background. I can add just a little bit more intent to what I do. And I'm big on that even in my classes. I am really big. I can get very sort of exhausting on technique sometimes, but you can sort of almost bypass some of these techniques. Instead of me telling you where your foot and your hand and your body should all be in this moment, I can even do this in dance. I can also tell someone, it's like, embody this moment. And all of a sudden you'll see somebody assume a posture and it's like, that's the one, right? And that's through just the right metaphor, the right words sort of inspire this moment, right? Or I tell someone to move with intent. And I hope I don't do this. I don't think this is Anonymous. I think it is Mazzolino, but he says something to the effect of appear before your opponent as if to be on fire. And that was such a good one. I love that, just coming with intensity. Whether it's in your sparring, or I mean, even when I'm like doing tango, like that's my big thing. It's like, come on, like this is about fire. This is a passion. This is intense.
yeah,
And there is a time to do your slow sparring and your drilling where you're very much focusing on your technique. You're refining your skill, and then there's that moment where it's competitive, and it does become a mind game, right? And even if you're not using that in a way of like manipulating your opponent, it's important to fire yourself up. And there's a lot of rhetoric that Ancelino uses where he gets very poetic. Um, and he gets a little bit more verbose, and then he'll sort of self-deprecate just for a moment and be like, "But my profession does not involve any of these things." Um, but he very much likes to quote a little bit of uh, you know uh, Shakespearean plays. He'll kind of touch on some Aristotle here and there, and I very much like what he brings there. Just I don't know, when I read it, because it's very much what we can do is read it and sort of put together how it's being written, but very different than all the other authors. And I get this like passionate part of him, and he can be sort of pompous sometimes, but I think that's what gets me, is that there's some heart, there's some passion behind his words. He's really into it. Where he's against, was it uh, people selling the art like a whore
hmm
or something like that. And it's like he's like, man, like it's really rough, because like you read that and you're like, but I want to make a living at this. Like, don't come on, like. But I very much enjoy how passionate he is about the art, and that really kind of like makes my heart sing.
yeah. He's definitely the humanist. You can get that from his references from Greek mythology and Roman mythology and
Mm-hmm.
reconnecting with all those things. But yeah, the point I was gonna say the point that you brought up about him with the not selling the art as a whore is something that a lot of people take as him throwing shade at Marazzo. So, um,
Mm-hmm.
and him
but
and his constant discussion of money. Um, so yeah, no, I love Manchulino too. As a matter of fact, so like this last year or so, I've really taken into doing two swords.
yeah.
Um, and like Marazzo's two swords are great. I mean, it's a great system. It's a lot more practical than Manciolino, but one of the things that I love about doing Manciolino's two swords is there's such a great flow between all of those techniques. Like when I
Mhm.
go out there and I practice it, like it is just probably a good minute and 30 seconds that I'm just flowing with two swords and just like going up and down all over the place. The footwork is really dynamic. It's really like beautiful. And it's one of my favorite like Bolognese forms to do. Whereas, Marazzo, everything he still has a great flow, a lot of really great back and forth, but you have everything just feels disjointed because you're just doing this technique, this technique, this technique. You do it seven, all seven of your techniques, and you're like, okay, they all break apart. But Manciolino, you can just like one solid thing just flow all the way up the field. It's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, and it's funny, because that works very much. I mean, the Bolognese in general, like there's a lot of similarities throughout all these books, right? But each one took like their own sort of piece from this tradition as a whole, and they give their own perspective on it. And it is funny how close in relation very much Marazzo and Mazzolino are. And it could almost be comical in like those comic strips of like the brain and the heart, just because Marzo can be very technical. It's like this works, this is the science of the thing, this you will be effective. But yeah, when you move through Mazzolino, this is very much someone that wanted you to flow through it. And again, it's harnessing your art in a different way. Like I said, I can get very technical on a thing, or I can have somebody like really feel impassioned by this movement, by this move, this set of moves, and all of a sudden you see a different like presence. Like it's not hard to tell them to have good posture anymore because they're fired up and they're already feeling gallant. I tell someone to sort of just lean slightly forward and have your arms, like just keep them like weapons in front of you. And if I tell someone, it's like appear before your opponent as if you are on fire, like come at them, like just make them feel like make them afraid that you're going to come at them, and I'll see something change in them, and it's like there it is, right? And it's as especially teaching in general, through like multiple arts, sometimes you have to play with the different temperaments of people. You have to reach them through a different way. And where I can get very esoteric, I'll lose people that are far more cerebral. I'm like, this is hogwash. The first time I had a partner that we were going to sort of like open a school with, it didn't work out because they were very technical and I was very like touchy feely about things.
Yeah.
Because I very much like to sort of harness that side and get you to feel the thing, like come alive, feel that fire. And then it's like, all right, there it is. That's the flavor of this ice cream. And now let's learn how to make ice cream. Okay, great. Just like it's like we all showed up to him. We all showed up, and I tell everybody this. I was like, let's not pretend. We all played some sort of role playing game. We played some video games. We watched some movies. They lit us up, and that's really kind of how we all showed up here in the first place. And that's not how we want to fence, right? But we can't deny that passionate part of us.
Yeah.
We can't let that go, right? That's the fire in the belly. That's not the machine, but that's the fire that makes the engine go.
I love that. I think you're right. Um, you know, different temperaments, being able to harness all the different temperaments, and being able to sort of pull that into your fencing, you know, I believe that is from the Anonymous where he says that you should be able to like cast yourself like you are on fire and then make yourself look like a devil, and essentially tells you to like throw all of your morals out the window. Be that kind of a person perhaps when you're in your courtly life or just walking in the street, but when you're fighting somebody, you know, something like empathy or kindness are something that's going to get you killed. And so like
Yeah,
he really kind of tells us to be a bastard. um
yeah. It's kind of a Carl Jung's like mastering your shadow, right? Like don't be a horrible person, but recognize that there's a darker like predatory side of you. And it's like, and when it comes to blows that are in Mortal Kombat, it's like it's time to, if you need to have disciplined that side of yourself and now bring it to bear, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's that Native American saying about the two wolves. I've always taken issue with that. And she's like, no, no, no. If you just if you neglect the dark wolf, as it were, then it's a loaded gun. You never know what it's going to do when it gets called upon, right? Like you got to train it just as much as you train the other one. That way, when you call one, they're both disciplined. They're both under your control. Um,
Yeah, that's awesome.
right.
Yeah. So, what are you studying right now in Manchilino? What weapons are you working with?
So that's an interesting question. I just in my current studies, I'm currently in a very like Italian tradition full system approach.
Gotcha.
So I haven't actually been diving into the specific books as of late. It's become a very kind of broad catch-all. For example, like when I'm teaching the Bolognese guards right now, I'm actually trying to have a broad teaching of them, right? Because each one's just a little different, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll kind of keep, I'll just, for example, I'll keep a very generic go of it at first and be like, cool, if your sword's on the lower right side, it's Codalunga. If it's directly center, it's it's a iron gate. If it's off to your left, it's a boar's tooth, right? And then I get into the higher ones, and I make that very generic as like the to the function of the thing. And I think that's what's important is um, the way I've sort of coming from like even Wing Chun, and then like when I first started, I got involved with Fire first, and just kind of closing and kind of getting into the grapple. I felt very much like, oh, this is very similar to what I've done there. And I think anyone that's got multiple martial arts under their belt see similar movements, similar functions. And I guess that's the journey that I'm currently on, is that it's not in one book, but I'm really looking at those similarities, those guiding principles, right?
Yeah.
Because it's better to know how to do the thing as a whole. And then of course, for example, like your favorite author, it's like then you can kind of jump in and find the flavor of it that you enjoy. You can get so much from the books, but maybe, yeah, like maybe you enjoy Manziolino's forms far more because they help you harness that part of yourself. And then if you really like that, you should probably go do more of something more technical to tame yourself. Realize that that's your weak point, to not be as cerebral and what's the word? Precise, I suppose is the word. Um, but yeah, I start with typically the guards, and that's to be it's been my thing right now for the group that I'm just getting started. I wish I had gotten the name and everything set up so I could sort of say what I'm the group that I've got, but I've got a small group now that I'm sort of playing with this syllabus, as you were, and I'm sort of testing right now its effectiveness to start someone with Bolognese as their first,
Yeah.
right? Almost everyone's coming from longsword or rapier, and I'm trying to play with Bolognese right out the gate.
Hey, I actually think that's really interesting. Let's kind of talk about that a little bit because I mean, you're essentially working on building a curriculum from grassroots, right? Like you're building this out of nothing. And I think you actually just touched on something that's really interesting because I think it could help a lot of people in teaching beginners, and the way that you approach teaching beginners, right? Like if you just throw a ton of jargon at a bunch of beginners and you give them absolutely no context to what they're doing, they're going to get frustrated and they're going to quit, right?
Yeah,
And you have to teach them core fundamental things. I really like what you said, especially about sort of thinking of the guards just in their, still give them the name, but just give them a general idea of where those guards are at, right? Like, and then they can sort of formulate that idea of what that guard does, and then you can start getting into the specifics and stuff like that, especially since you're dealing with people who don't have context to build off of, you know.
yeah. The hardest
Uh,
sell is for those that do have another art. Sometimes they carry a lot of stuff, but they want to stick to their prior one.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
so for the example though, like longsworders, they love their long swords. They do not want to part from them at all. But one of the things that's fun is when you play with this, right? Because I'll have all the portaferros along the center. They're like, well, that's different because two portaferros off to my right. I'm like, is it? Where are your hands?
Hmm.
And they're like, they're on my right. I'm like, no, go again. Go to empty-handed poster, and they'll drop their hands in the center. And I'm like, cool. Now pick up the sword. Now enter two to Portaferro. And I'm like, cool. Now go to Portaferro Mazzana. Your hands are in the center. So the principle is the same, right? And kind of getting like, just kind of moving all those guards, even if you go into like Furious on Horse, and just kind of get that. I was like, there are principles here, and that's what you should focus on. We get caught up in our flavor sometimes. Everybody likes their flavor. Everybody likes their certain politics.
Hey,
But
bolognese pasta sauce is the best sauce. I don't care what anybody else
that's
says.
right. You could have sauce or meatballs, or you could have meat sauce. Come on. But yeah, the guiding principles are the way I like to teach right now. And as far as just the correct one thing, it I wouldn't say my syllabus right now is from the ground up. This is very much what happened after I did my intensive at Academie Duello. Right, he takes very much a full system approach, and that very much that appealed to me, and I sort of have been on this journey for a while. Um, Sidesword just isn't a starting art, right? It's you have to move into it, and that's was it? I think CSG is similar. You got to move up the ladder to get to the bolognese. And I'll be honest, I don't want to wait. I love it, and I want to do it now. Um, and I'm trying to find a way to make that palatable and approachable from a foundational level, and then move up
Gotcha.
to the more complicated actions. And fun enough, my journey into dance is actually through studying Bolognese. I looked at the footwork, and I was trying to, I didn't want to emulate, you know what I mean? Like look at the picture and put my feet and knees in the right place and then discover if how that works. That's imitation, right? And that's not bad. It's a good place to start. But I like immersion rather than imitation. Actually produce the footwork and the technique that makes it work. And I went into a little bit of ballet, and from there dance. And me actually being a dance instructor was me trying to understand the mechanics of this art more deeply.
All right. So, all right, we can't move on from here without talking about that. All right. So,
Okay.
tell me little bit about that. Like now that you have that experience and that frame of reference, what do you think about the footwork postures of the Bolognese system? And, especially like what you were talking about, like not necessarily imitation, but actually doing the things that put you in those positions. Elaborate on that. Like elaborate on that concept.
Sure. So there are many things, of course, in dance in general. Even if someone were just take some ballroom lessons, which of course is another expense, but just learning the art of dance already is like, oh, these are very similar principles here. I mean, even a dance frame is me making sure that I am having a firm upper frame here to communicate with my partner, and that I move from my core forward, and that tells them where to go, right?
Hmm.
And so, and they're like, right, and you do that in fencing, and I'm like, as a deception, right? It's like it's the difference between a cooperative dance and an adversarial one,
Hmm.
right? Because in the same way that I'm telegraphing through my frame is the same way that I'm telegraphing, letting you know that I'm going here so that you respond to it. So then I step through and go there. But the idea is that you feel what I'm doing before I've actually moved forward, right? You read something and respond. The next layer of this was funny enough when I was learning Latin dancing,
Hmm.
you get into Cuban motion. In Cuban motion, you can do in a imitation way. You can emulate by stepping onto a bent knee. And each step that you make is onto a bent knee. But that is only sort of like the first layer when you're first just getting someone to understand, right? In the same way that you might tell someone like, cool, we're going to step onto the bent knee. We'll be slightly forward weighted. And then you'll slowly get into like being like, and you're going to cock your foot out just the littlest bit, like you're just getting those little pieces, right? And these are all emulating, right? Just like you're getting someone to like slowly stretch. They're not ready to do the splits yet, but we need to get the body ready for this thing. And then later on in something in Cuban motion, it's not stepping onto a bent knee. It's pre-positioning yourself. You actually sink your weight into the foot and you open up the hip, and then you push from the standing leg, your bent leg forward. and then you actually push the hips forward, and that rounds you out, brings you center, and then you push through the knee and push yourself onto the next foot. And this keeps happening. You keep opening and closing the hips back and forth. And this
Man.
is the same way you can be up in Alta, very wide and open. Your hip is back. The sword is coming forward. You're pushing that hip slightly forward. The arm's in front of you. Now the hip is forward. And from here, the foot can slowly start to move out. And it can be exhausting and verbose to break all these things down. But then you're actually producing the technique that powers a thing through, right? The easiest way to put this is that the sword and your arm are the arrow, and your body is the bow.
Yeah.
You are simply aiming with the arrow, and it does hit the target, but your body needs to be doing all of the like pulling back, winding motion, and then unwinding and launching yourself forward. And the footwork, looking at the pictures, you can easily blow out a knee or mess up your ankle by just trying to emulate where those foot placements are and then power forward like the manual is telling you to.
Yeah.
Without a deeper understanding, you can hurt yourself or never truly get the full power and gracefulness.
Yeah, because I think that sometimes there are some practitioners that I've seen that focus too much on emulation, and it hinders their footwork and their movement ability because they're always moving to these really deep postures that are, like that's they move like very disjointed because of that. Now, I do want to say two things. First of all, I think that you just created an army of Cuban dancers. I think that I think there are a lot of Bolognese folks that are gonna be like, hey, you know what? This is all right. We're gonna get into this. And two, that's some you touched on something with sort of moving the hips and connecting the feet and stuff like that. I always teach my students that your back foot, when you're in any sort of a guard, your back foot is always essentially the piston that's powering your hips, right? And if you can
Mm,
move that back foot, whether that back foot faces forward or if it faces off to the side, that's controlling your hips. It's like a rudder on a ship, you know.
mhm.
And so if you learn how to sort of control that in your movement and everything like that, you can start to integrate that into your steps. You can create really powerful, beautiful cuts. Um, so that was awesome. Thank you for sharing that because that is, I'm gonna go take some Cuban dance classes now. I was gonna go learn the Gilliard, is I think that's what it is, but now I've changed my
Yeah.
mind. I'm gonna go
Well,
learn
okay.
some.
Well, let me say that any dance experience will open your eye, just like any other martial art experience gives you a different perspective.
Yeah,
Um, so a good dance school should be able to sort of give you a like what I would call a social survival kit. Like they're gonna let you kind of try out a few dances. And the best ones will be able to like, cool, here's a smooth one, which like a traveling one, which would be like a tango or a waltz, a Latin one, like a rumba or a cha-cha. And then, usually something more specialty. And that's the best is for you to actually sort of try to spread that out a little bit rather than just put all your eggs in one basket. Because no one of these dances is really going to give you the full answer. But yeah, the understanding how the hips move in Cuban motion is going to be eye-opening for how you actually want to like position yourself.
yeah. I always think too, again, going back to imitation versus actually developing a sense of flow. Um, One of the things that I think makes really beautiful fencing is that continuous motion and that flow that you can develop when you're transitioning between different guards, postures, cuts, thrusts. If you can just keep things moving and constantly just like approaching, that is what really creates dynamic and beautiful fencing. And all of that is learning how to connect the body. And I think that semblance of flow, the idea of flow, is something
Mhm.
that you can definitely learn by doing dance.
Yes. And to kind of bring it full circle, that kind of brings it back to why that one version of bringing the lance down while jousting is the most beautiful, because the horse is running and you haven't gone from a straight up position to then taking it straight down and then charging forward. Because again, that's very static. That's position one, position two, and drive. This one is the horse went from walk, trot, canter, and in that span, your lance also very slowly transitioned, right? So that same idea of it's not going from static motion to static motion, it's fluid, it's throughout, it never stops moving. So it's great that no matter where you are, on foot or on horse, that's the that's the dream, that's the key, that's the goal.
That's awesome. So I have a few more questions that I want to ask you here, just because I think that one, I really want your input, but two, I think it's, you. Let me frame this a better way. Um, you did a fantastic job in the online Bolognese form competition when you
Well,
were
thank you.
forming your Marazzo uh, part 1 and 2, and I just wanted to kind of get your perspective on developing forms out of the source material and some of the challenges that you faced and how you've overcome them and developing your interpretations.
Very good. Yeah. So obviously, just like everyone else, lots of trial and error. There were days where, so first of all, it's a lot of it is just running it, right? Just moving through it over and over again. Not at full speed, right? So you want to move through it casually, and then of course, and then move through it with intent,
Mm.
right? It is those moments, not at full speed. Don't go like sparring or performance, right? Level. Because I've done that, and you will find out where your form goes wrong. You'll find that, and that happened a few times on some of the like montantes. I would like the next day, I would like, ooh, I feel that in my arm. I'm not powering that correctly, right? So there, I'm trying to think of how I want to put it. Typically put this when I'm talking about how to engage the three P's, which is position, pressure, and then when you get those right, you unlock purpose. So in this case, when you're breaking down a play, you want to get the mechanics first, right? So first understand the full thing, right? Read the whole play, right? And try to get through like the first part of it, and piece those together. Just get the steps. I jokingly say this all the time for those learning to dance to get they're like, I just want to find a girl or something. They want to find somebody. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna teach you the steps, but it's up to you to put on the moves. So like first go through the steps before you add the moves, right? Get technical, be very Marazzo about it, and then add the fire, then add the extra. But start from a mechanical place, right? Get the mechanics of the movement. And then what you need next is context, right? So a lot of us, of course, training alone, but there is context that you can give yourself, even just through imagining what this move is for and what it's supposed to do, right? Bringing the montante up to cut at the wrist is important for knowing it's like, that's why you're doing that, right? Even if it's just to make them retreat and not actually hit their wrist, it doesn't matter. That's what it's for. And it's very important to actually kind of go back to the whole like, hey, why were you here? Were you a kid that loved swinging swords and you had an imaginary opponent? Cool. Bring that back, right? Keep your diligent, approach to this art, but bring your imagination into it. Bring some visual context, especially during this COVID time if you have no one to practice with. What are you doing this move for? What is the context of it? And move yourself in that way, right? And I've gone through the first three moves of an assalto just trying to move in that way. It's like, cool, bring it context, right? Outside of the embellishment, of course, which is, of course, an embellishment. But it's like, I want to move with purpose, right? Move with that context. And when I can give myself that sort of visualization of why I'm doing a thing, then I move with intent. Because I watched a lot of videos and I was very blown away that I hit third. And I was like, how, me? There's a lot of people a lot better than me. And I think they were much better technically, but they didn't bring an intent, right? Because like one of those factors was intensity, or was it the sprezzatura,
Yep.
or something like that. And I feel like that's how I even got into the top three, was just that you bring that intent to it. So learn the mechanics, then add context, right? That context of this needs to work, right? Like you find out if your wrist is in the right position or not, even by trying to do a montante to like a tabletop. If you have a poor wrist position, that sword's going to completely break, right? You need to engage the hand a little bit, give a little bit of pressure from that false edge, and if your hand doesn't budge, you've got good structure,
Let
right?
me let me tell you a story about that. So there's a Bolognese tournament that I don't know if you listened to the episode with Eric Lowe, but there's a Bolognese tournament that he hosts down in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's in Charlotte, and they have this tournament down in Charlotte. And one of the things that they've added over the last couple of years is cutting with a side sword. And the very, I think it was the third round of this competition, you had to do a false edge cut. I won't say any names. I'll do my best not to say any names. But there was one fellow who, you know, was great at cutting with two-handed swords and stuff like that, but didn't quite understand the full mechanics of cutting with a side sword, but managed to make it to the third round because of just, having decent cutting mechanics with, downward cuts and stuff like that. So he gets into the third round, tries to do I guess it would be a falso drito or a falso
Mhm.
manco. Tries to do
Okay.
a falso manco, and the sword literally just flies out of his hand. This sharp sword
Yeah. Oof.
flying up in the air. Like we're in this ballroom in a hotel, and the sword just goes flying up in the air, probably like 10 feet up, and then just like starts falling to the ground in slow motion, and everybody's just like frozen in place, like, oh my
Uh-huh.
god, what are we supposed to do right now? There's literally a sharp sword flying through the air. Luckily, there was enough of a safe buffer that it wasn't a problem, and it fell harmlessly to the ground. But that was one of the craziest experiences I've ever seen in my entire life, just watching that sword fly out of that guy's hand. But it was all because his mechanics were poor, as he was trying to do, not necessarily a montante, but he was trying to do that falso manco, and he allowed his wrist to bend
Mm,
bar instead of having a steady structure and keeping it almost at that, slightly 90 degrees.
yeah.
And so it went flying out of his hand.
I'll say that a lot to a lot of long sorters that come into to my class. It's going to be like, you take for granted the body mechanics that are at work with the two-handed sword just because you've got that lever action from the other hand, and also most of the time you are having concordant strikes, right? You're stepping with that strike, and you take for granted like how you powered your hip to make that happen. You don't have that luxury with the one-handed sword, right? You need to have just a slightly better understanding of your body mechanics to make these false edge parries and cuts work, right? To make that go through. So it's, to me, I'm like, I'm not telling you to only do side sword. I'm just saying your one-handed work will make everything else so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that you had also touched upon was that you've been essentially studying from a lot of different sources and kind of pulling out from like that, just because of the way that things are structured at Academie Duello. How do you view the Bolognese material in context or comparison of the other sources or traditions?
Uh, hmm. Okay. Well, let's just say I got introduced with Fure. I've done that for quite a few years. Kind of moved over to like some Capo Ferro, and it was actually while I was doing Rapier that all of a sudden my instructor was like, "Hey, have you seen this like Delagoke thing?" And he we went through the was it like we saw like a little preview like PDF thing or whatever, like a little like a teaser or whatever. And I was like, I just ate it up. I literally just like for the first time now. Actually, this is the key, and this is why I like it more than the others. Is that of the other books, I can just read these,
Yeah.
and they're not a pain to read. Like some people enjoy reading Fure, and I suppose I do enjoy actually having illustrations. That is a plus. But the rhetoric gets me. You know,
Yeah.
do this because it's great. It's
Yeah.
really good. I know how to do it and I'm awesome at it. Well, thanks. That was stirring information. What about me? Um, and that's just it's just that it's got a bit more soul to it. I mean, even Marazzo, you can tell that he's very interested in it. And I very much like something that was given a suggestion to me is that when is read the whole book, not just the sexy stuff. right? You know, you just don't pop open the book and just read the plays. Like read the whole thing. Like find out who that book is for. You know, like it's like, why do you like Dalagoke? It's like Dalagoke is great for the beginner because the book is literally about, hey, you know, this isn't fashionable anymore. This is how, like this, it's concise, it's to the point, it's just someone that doesn't really know better, you know,
Yeah.
opposed to the other end of the spectrum, which is Marazzo, who's very much talking to somebody who probably wants to become an instructor. You know,
Yeah.
like even his advice of just like take your senior students, like go out to dinner, have a little camaraderie with them, you know, talking about how like, you know, go ahead.
He's writing for Sebastian, right? So he's writing for his son. Is you know, this is my advice to you and how you're going to run this business when I'm gone. And then
Yeah.
he retires and goes and starts his mill, and you know, Sebastian takes over the business. And we know that Sebastian did take over the business. So you're absolutely right. He is writing to somebody who has expert knowledge.
Yeah. But you know, some people like you know, Fury has of course multiple books and they're all written by, you know, assumingly the same guy. But it's really beautiful to have an art with multiple perspectives and also talking to multiple audiences. Again, like many people can read Bolognese and they are going to have a favorite book at first. They're going to have one of these authors that actually speaks to them. This makes sense to them. You know, like I like this impassioned approach. I like this simple approach. I like this very technical approach. Um, and then you get to learn a bit more, but it kind of speaks to everybody. And that's what I'm big on. You know, look at the guiding principles, but I love the speech of it, opposed to reading, you know, and I don't want to offend any rapier fighters, but the rapier books kind of exhaust me sometimes.
Yeah,
It's a bit more pinky in the air than I'm ready for, and that's coming from the ballroom dancer.
Have you checked out the Anonymous Vienna?
Not yet.
Oh, I think you should check out the Anonymous Vienna
Okay.
because it's I think I referenced it in the last podcast when I was talking to Marino, but it's a book that was written by I mean, well, we don't know who it was written by. We know that he was a scholar or a student of Fabris, and we know that
Mm,
he was in Germany, and so he traveled to study in some way. But he has a very intimate knowledge of Fabris, and he's writing from a student's perspective, and it is way different than reading Fabris. It's completely, you know, it's not as technical. It really gets a lot more into the movement, and it reads more like a Bolognese text. It's fantastic.
beautiful.
Yeah, you should check it out.
I absolutely will. That you already sold me on it. So.
I know Tom Leone. That was a plug for you, my friend. So, all right. So one of the things that I like to conclude with is what is something that you think that we can use, we as a community can improve upon to better reflect the sources in our fencing.
Mm, that is a hard question to answer. I suppose, you know, I'm this the easy the cop out answer I suppose is to um you know, read, you know, like try to actually follow the advice. You know, again, that's the don't just read the sexy stuff. Don't just read the plays and then move through it. Whether you have never swung a sword or you come from a different art, even if it's just another, you know, historical fencing uh, discipline, is to just really kind of take that advice. Funny enough, I did a fun little thing on Easter. It was Easter basket of beatings, and they're just a basket of little limitations. You reach in and you grab your limitation. One of them, sometimes they're just like only fendentes. Like that's all you can do. Like you are not allowed to do anything else. You can only do fendentes. And I forgot what one of them was. I think I just called it like Anonymous number one. And was that
Okay.
one of his advice was like never take more than one step forward
Uh,
when on the offense. It was something to that effect. I will absolutely own up to talking out of my butt on that one.
I don't know. I haven't read the first play like text in a while. I've
Mm,
the progression of the first play, but I mean, you do gather forward and then take a step forward.
he does. There's some advice there about don't take more than one step forward towards your opponent to that degree, and that became the limitation of just like so. It's like it's just read that advice and then like it sounds strange, but like take some advice and isolate it for a moment. element. Isolated drills are always great. Like you can only attack, only defend, only do this. And it's like, take these, apply it, like make it work. Don't just hold the sword and say, I'm doing bolognese. Because I tell you what's the best compliment ever is to be swinging a sword and buckler and someone go, that is very beautiful bolognese, right? Otherwise, they're just like, oh, that's nice, I-3-3, right? It's such a, like, there's so many interpretations, like it's very broad as to seeing somebody use that. But when someone very pointedly says, oh, that's very nice bolognese, you moved sort of in a more like kind of more honoring that tradition. And I would say, take these pieces, no matter where you are in the book, isolate that advice and try to actually apply it. Because many times I've got a great practitioner that he's such a good fighter. He doesn't read the sources, but he's such a good fighter. And he just beats me. There's actually a ton of bruises up my arm right now because he was just hitting the crap out of me. And I love him for it because I really want to dive into the art and I want the art to work. And he'll beat me. And I'm like, thank you. And I'll go back to the drawing board and I'll go on the advice of what everyone's saying about this particular move. And I'll go and I'll drill it and I'll keep getting beat up. And then I'm finding out whether I have the right approach or I just need to work on it more. And that's what I mean by like, read the advice, take it, do the work too. If it doesn't work right off the bat, I'm sorry, like nothing works out right the first time. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Go again. Get back on the horse. You're going to get unhorsed. It's going to happen. You got to get back on the horse and you got to try that again.
Oh, man. All right. So since you just brought it full circle, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there because that was profound and beautiful advice, my friend. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise.
You yourself are a muse. You are like the living embodiment of Machiavelliano, my friend. Thanks for coming on and sharing your insights with us because I thought that was really fantastic. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been an honor.
I want to thank Eric Weiss again for coming on and talking to us about jousting and swordsmanship and dancing and how all those things relate. Man, that was absolutely fantastic. So much great information in there. I know I'm going to get some dance lessons. I don't know about the rest of you. Next week's episode is going to be with Martin. You've probably seen him on the Schildfach Potsdam YouTube channel. And we're going to get into all sorts of Bolognese goodness. So stay tuned for that and stay saucy, my friends.